G'day and welcome back to a Wimbledon video. This is for legal studies. It's a legal studies teacher reads the news. Looking today at how we can incorporate a contemporary issue into the preliminary course. And specifically, I'm looking at part 3 here, the law in practice. Now, this is a unit that's often kind of integrated in to the other two units. So you'll see here the law in practice unit can be integrated to part 1 or 2 or treated as a separate unit. I often like to separate them out and look at something kind of in kind of complete picture of, for example, law reform. We'll do a bit of law reform and we'll do lockout laws. And so we've already done law reform as the unit, part 2, and then part 3 we see it as a whole unit, and we look at lockout laws as that. But often what happens in legal studies, I find, is that an issue comes to the table and we'll look at it in a class. And so this is an example where you might do like a little micro unit. You might look at a lesson or 2 lessons at an issue that is occurring as we speak. And this happened the other day when the Sydney trains decided to not run. So it's the 21st of February 2022, and commuters get to the station early or find out from the news that all of a sudden the trains aren't running. Now, this causes absolute chaos because of the day that it was. It was the first day that they had eased restrictions of COVID in office buildings, so they're hoping a whole bunch of people would come into the CBD. It was the first day of international travellers coming in from overseas, so a whole bunch of transport required there, people trying to get to the airport. It was also the first day of uni going back and school as well, a whole bunch of people obviously going to school. So it really was kind of a combination of a whole bunch of things. And what we're seeing is the main transport system of New South Wales, specifically Sydney, just not running. And looking at these first couple of photos, we see all of this. The station is closed, all train services have been suspended, customers urged to avoid travel where possible, use alternative mode of transport, and allow extra travel time on other modes of transport. Now, something like this has happened before, so why was so much chaos caused this time? The answer is people didn't know it was going to happen. So it's all well and good saying use alternative mode of transport, but if you rock up at the station and you had no idea you needed to use alternative modes of transport, then you're in a bit of a bother. It was raining. It was not a great day for it, and so here you see people stranded, closed, waiting for buses. These kind of things coming up, and you'll note due to industrial action. Due to industrial action, there it is. So what's happening here? What are we talking about? What is the issue? Well, if we're looking at it from a syllabus point of view, this is a challenge. It's a contemporary issue that has occurred, and we want to have a think about it in relation to what are the themes and challenges that can be incorporated into this topic. So, for example, the responsiveness of the legal system in dealing with issues, and we'll see where that comes from, and the effectiveness of legal and non-legal mechanisms in achieving justice. Now, that sounds a bit full on, achieving justice. What I'm basically talking about here is the idea that the legal system is supposed to work in a certain way so that the society can function, and that hasn't happened in this case. So if we're looking at it, we're thinking about, here's a good example where we can quickly have a go at evaluating the effectiveness of the legal response to this issue. And the issue is industrial action. The issue is disagreement between those running the trains and between the workers. And initially, throughout the day, what we had was the Prime Minister and the Premier basically blaming the union, the Rail and Train Bus Union, RTBU, and basically saying that they had decided to do action and City Trains had no choice. Because of this action that was undertaken, they had to stop the trains. Now, how much of that was accurate? That's the question that we want to ask ourselves. And we hear from Shay McChrystal here. She's a professor of labour law at, where is she from? Where are we? Deputy Head of School and Deputy Dean of the University of Sydney Law School. Okay, and she's here to basically give her opinion on this claim that it was the fault of the union for the industrial action. Let's have a read of what she's going to say here. On Monday morning, Sydney woke up to public transport chaos. Train networks closed down and a war of words between the government, City Trains and the unions over the blame for this purported strike action. During the day, it became clear the chaos stemmed not from strike action, but from a management decision to shut down the train network because of its concerns that planned protected industrial action by the union would make the train network unsafe to run. Okay, fair enough. We're still in this, it's industrial action. We're still in this idea, and just because the decision was made by management, that makes it sound like they didn't have a choice. Shea disagrees. Yet, in January 2018, Dominic Perrottet, as then New South Wales Minister for Industrial Relations, sought and obtained an order under Section 424 of the Fair Work Act in the Fair Work Commission, suspending proposed protected industrial action by the same union, citing the desire to avoid the very same chaos that descended on Monday. That proposed protected industrial action involving an overtime ban and 24-hour work stoppage was suspended on the basis that it posed a threat to the welfare, life, health and safety of the population of Sydney and threatened to damage the economy. In other words, the Premier, back when he was in charge of industrial relations, said, this strike action you're planning is too dangerous, and therefore he went to the Fair Work Commission, and this is why it's one of the mechanisms we have, and basically said to the judge, we need to ban this. And he was awarded the decision. In his decision, Senior Deputy President Jonathan Hamburger relied on evidence presented by the New South Wales Government that the proposed action threatened the welfare of New South Wales commuters, including affecting students, those attending hospital, etc. And it would cost $90 million. Now, just 4 years later, it appears that rather than urgently seeking similar orders under Section 424 of the Fair Work Act, suspending the proposed industrial action, management and the New South Wales Government opted to shut down the entire transport network. So Shay's asking you to ask yourself now, why didn't they do the same thing again? If it was such a threat, why shut it down with no notice whatsoever and not take the action that you've already successfully taken years ago? If, as has been claimed loudly by the media, the proposed protected industrial action posed such a threat to the safety of commuters on the Sydney Rail network that it necessitated shutting down the network entirely, why weren't these claims put to the test before the Commission on Sunday night in the urgent hearing listed at the request of Sydney Trains? So they literally had the same hearing on the night before and did not put those claims that were successful last time to the test. The rules, Shea says, around protected industrial action under the Fair Work Act are complex. In essence, the provisions allow for a level of industrial rough and tumble in the form of protected industrial action. For employees, this can span a range of conduct from refusing to wear work uniforms or overtime or other bans, right through to a total refusal to work or a strike in the traditional sense. For management, this includes the right to respond to such action by employees through a lockout of their workers. In other words, closing all the doors and saying, you're not let in. We're not paying you. All of this takes place in the context of bargaining for a collective agreement to govern working conditions for up to 4 years, which is what they're in the middle of. The ability of workers to take this action is highly constrained. Only after a current agreement has expired, only after a strike ballot has approved the action and notice requirements have been met, and always with the possibility that the action might otherwise be brought to an end through suspension or termination, as happened. So note that what she's saying is here is you can't just call a strike the night before. That's not how it works. It's highly constrained. Significantly, the union in this matter had learned well the lessons of 2018 when they were cancelled. The action proposed was carefully calibrated to avoid the kind of threat to welfare, health, safety or life that would require the Commission to make an order suspending it. The inability of management clearly to articulate this threat and to seek an order on Sunday suspending the action on this basis speaks volumes about the credibility of the claim itself and casts a serious cloud over the necessity of the management's decision to shut down the network. But now the management's withdrawn its Work Commission claim, what happens next? So note that they had a claim in for the work in the Commission, Fair Work Commission, and they have withdrawn it since. The union's right to take protected industrial action is not suspended, and it insists the proposed action is safe. If it's genuinely not safe as claimed, management should seek a suspension order under Section 424, sending the parties back to the bargaining table. Otherwise, the union action will continue in accordance with the scheme of the Act, and if management choose to shut down the network again, it should own the decision for what it genuinely is, and this is Shay's opinion, a lockout in support of its bargaining claims, not an employee strike. To say otherwise is political spin. Okay, so we've got this issue here, and Shay McChrystal knows all about the labour laws and how they work, and is very, very clear here that what has happened is actually a lockout, not a strike. Why? Because the strike could not have occurred due to the highly constrained kind of laws around that, and at the same time, if it was as dangerous as claimed, why didn't they put in the same action that they did 4 years earlier and successfully stopped the industrial action? So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Then we have a secondary issue, which I'm not going to read out, but basically the Premier was furious that he didn't know until the morning. And what has ended up happening is we've got an internal dossier collected of all the things that staff knew, and this is basically this question of who knew what when. Transport Minister David Elliott, unbelievably, came under fire because he received a text message at 10:53, I believe it was, on Sunday, saying that if there was disruption, there'd be huge disruption. This is on top of news which has since come out that studies were done to find out how much it would cost and how much disruption there would be in the weeks before this. Then David Elliott went to bed with an inkling there was going to be potential widespread disruption. Went to bed before any decision was made and only learned the network had shut down when he woke up on Monday morning. Remember, he is the minister in charge. So the decision has been made without him. The decision has been made by the head of Sydney Trains. He said, yeah, I backed this guy to make his decision, but he was literally in bed and didn't know until he woke up the next morning. So it's this question of competency and this question of who knew what when. And why is that important? Because if these guys are in charge of the network and if it's actually a shutdown and it's their responsibility, then there's gross incompetence in the running of the network. And Australians, citizens, most certainly Sydney-siders, should be absolutely ropeable. Absolutely ropeable that this has occurred. And so what you can do, and I've done this with my class here, this is him getting grilled on them, basically said to my class, have a read through some of these articles, then I want you to write out an evaluative paragraph. I want you to pick one of these as a criteria and evaluate the effectiveness of the legal system in responding to this issue of an industrial dispute between the employers, the RTBU, and Sydney Trains. And I created, and I've shown this before, I created a scaffold where they basically say, this is the issue, this is the problem that we've got, and this is the criteria that we're using. So some of them used responsiveness based on David Elliott not responding well enough and to Sydney Trains not doing it. Others used meeting society's needs. So this concept of if we're going to have huge disruption of a transport system that hundreds of thousands of Australians use to get to work, well, then they need to have enough time to make, as was claimed, where are we? Alternative modes of transport and extra travel time. So, and then they wrote those out, sent them to me. I had a look, made some suggestions, gave them some feedback, etc. So here's an example where students can, in real time, read an article and then have a go at putting law into practice and thinking through who's at fault here, how should it have happened, how do we evaluate the effectiveness and the ineffectiveness of responses to this, and then we can go into much greater detail, if they so desire, thinking through this process of the Fair Work Act and industrial action, etc. All right, so hopefully that's a helpful little example of what you can do in legal studies using information that comes out in real time. As kids are experiencing this, they're seeing that legal studies is a subject that deals in real time and deals with issues that are happening as we speak. One of its greatest things going for it, and something that engages students greatly.